I would love to share my story about my health history and kind of what insulin resistance sort of the role that it played with my own health. So basically, I was a pretty sick kid. I always had ear infections and strep throat and a pretty bad immune system. And so that meant I needed to take a lot of antibiotics. I ate the standard American diet, and that really means that I ate a lot of processed carbohydrates. I had a lot of, breakfast cereal and pancakes and waffles and bread and of course I was always eating low fat because I was a product of the 80s and 90s. So everything was low fat in that era. So not a lot of good healthy fats for us. And I got older and I was in college and I got really bad asthma and allergies and sinus issues. And I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And at that point, I was working in a nursing home. And at the same time that I was going through all my medical stuff, I saw people around me just suffering with all sorts of diagnoses, and they had tons of medications. And meanwhile, they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s. And I was in my 20s and I was still on quite a few prescription medications. I was giving myself 5 allergy injections in the stomach every few days. And because I was just allergic to so many things. And I was like, what the heck is going to happen to me when I'm this age? Like, I'm just going to end up like this. And I just said to myself, like, no, I'm not going to let this happen. This doesn't feel natural. There's something wrong with this picture. And I just didn't believe that we didn't have any control over this. And so at that time, I found the paleo diet, and I read a book by Rob Wolf called The Paleo Diet Solution. And it was all basically talking about eating real food. So eating meats and vegetables and nuts and fruits and seeds and things that come from the earth, eggs and fish and all that, and getting rid of this processed food, these bad inflammatory oils. And I switched my diet, and everything I had going on got better. I got rid of my allergies. I got off all my medications. I never had asthma again. I felt like I wanted to scream this information from the rooftops. It was so important. It was so amazing. But then my hormones started to go crazy because I had a really stressful year. I went through a breakup. I moved, and I was just really struggling with hormone symptoms. And so for me, that looked like I lost my menstrual cycle. I was having really bad acne. And at first it was tied to my cycles, but then it was all the time. And then I was feeling a lot of fatigue. I was like sleeping all through the morning. And normally, like, I'm an early bird, I wake up very early. And I think I mentioned I lost my cycle, and then I was gaining weight that I couldn't lose. And I didn't know what was going on. And then I found out I had what's called polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is basically just a collection of symptoms. And they include the ones that I mentioned, where women don't ovulate. Sometimes they don't get their periods, or they're very late. Some other women lose hair from the top of their head and also grow facial hair. I luckily didn't have those symptoms, but many women do. And I tried really hard to fix my PCOS because I'm like, I already healed myself with my diet once. I want to do it again. So I was trying really hard to heal my PCOS, and and everything I read was like, get rid of processed sugar. I'm like, I don't eat processed sugar, that good, check. It's like, get rid of dairy and gluten. I'm like, I already did. They're like, eat real food. I'm like, I do. So I felt like I was already doing everything right, but I couldn't make a dent in my symptoms. I was not losing weight. If anything, I felt like everyone would be around me would be like eating cookies, and I would just walk by the cookies and gain weight. Like, I was gaining all their weight. I didn't know. It felt like my body was rebelling on me. And like I said, I couldn't make a dent in it. And then one day I heard someone talking, and they said, PCOS is like the diabetes of the ovaries. And I was like, what? What do you mean diabetes? So at that time, the only thing I knew about diabetes was that it had something to do with blood sugar and something to do with like amputations, because I worked in the nursing home, and a lot of my patients who had diabetes had amputations. That's all I knew about it. And it was something that in all the research that I had done about nutrition and how to heal myself, it was this big gaping hole around blood sugar because I always said to myself, well, I don't have diabetes, so that's not relevant for me. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't have diabetes, so I don't need to pay attention to this. And I couldn't have been more wrong, because what I didn't realize was that the insulin resistance that I was experiencing that I didn't know about, it was actually driving my PCOS. So the PCOS ended up being a manifestation of insulin resistance for me. And so when we talk about insulin resistance, we know that insulin goes hand in hand with blood sugar. So what that basically means is that when we eat anything with carbohydrates in it, or we have sugar, it gets digested and goes into our bloodstream, all that sugar or glucose. And so insulin, if we have a functioning pancreas, if we don't have type 1 diabetes, our pancreas senses the rise in blood sugar, and it will emit this hormone called insulin. And insulin is like a little lock. So it goes onto the cells of our body. There's every single cell in our body has receptors for insulin. So it will hook into the cell and sort of like open this port, and now the glucose can go inside. And the glucose or sugar is used as fuel for our cells. So insulin is necessary to get the sugar out of the blood to use for fuel. So insulin resistance is basically when either there's already too many insulin already in the cell. It's like, we're full. There's no more receptors left. The cell is full, no occupancy. Bye. Like, I can't take you. But also there develops this thing called resistance. And so I explain resistance like, let's say I'm listening to my headphones and it's so noisy outside. They start mowing the lawn. So I turn up my volume, and then there's a truck and it more noise and traffic. I'm like, oh, let me just turn up the volume a little bit. So now I'm listening to my music and someone comes to the door. I pause my music. I answer them. I put my headphones back on. I press play. What's going to happen? It's going to be like, oh, that's so loud, right? It wasn't loud before, but now it feels loud because my ears had already developed resistance to that stimulus. Same thing if you put on a shirt and it has like a tag on it and it's so itchy. It's like, oh, this tag is like bothering me. In a minute, you don't feel it anymore, right? Because again, we have that resistance. So our body develops resistance to all sorts of things very quickly. So all of those things, those two examples I gave you, it happens quickly. So when we're eating a lot of foods that spike blood sugar all the time, we're always increasing our insulin. And so when insulin is in the blood for a long time, that's when we start to develop resistance. It's almost like they're knocking on the door. It's like, dude, you were just here. Like, I don't want any more. So they're starting to ignore it, and they're starting to ignore the signal of insulin. And so now you have this sugar floating in the blood that can't get into the cells of the body. So now the cells are like, we have no energy. We feel like we're starving over here, yet the energy is all around them. They just can't access it. So people with insulin resistance might end up having high blood sugar, but feeling really tired and hungry all the time because they feel hungry because their cells are starving because they can't get the glucose inside.